With that, we'll jump all the way to one of our faculty who was born the year before the department was formed. He was a year old. Umesh, over to you.
Hello everyone, good afternoon, and thank you for coming. At CES, like we've heard from Maria and Vishu, we are interested in form, function, and fitness. But the form, function, and fitness of individuals, of organisms, operates within certain ecological contexts. And perhaps this is one of those times when those ecological contexts are changing dramatically and changing very, very fast because of what we call global change drivers. Global change drivers include things like climate change, include things like the loss and degradation of natural habitats, the proliferation of invasive species, pollution, and so on. And so in CES, a lot of the research groups are actually actively working on understanding how biodiversity is being affected by these changing contexts, by climate change, by habitat loss, by pollution, and so on. We work across the length and breadth of India. Those white dots are where our field sites are on a variety of species, and I will be telling you a little bit about some of those species and how they're responding to these global change drivers. And we try to understand how these global change drivers are affecting biodiversity by looking at how behavior changes, how populations change, how entire communities of organisms change, and how ecosystems and their functions change as a result of these global change drivers. We'll start in the northwest of the country, in the Thar Desert, where, as we know, lives the spiny-tailed lizard, and it lives in a very, very hot place, and that has consequences. Many people think lizards are cold-blooded, so whatever the ambient temperature is, whatever the outside temperature is, that's the temperature of the lizard as well. That's the body temperature of the lizard as well. So if the spiny-tailed lizard was perfectly ectothermic, then its body temperature would be along that line. So whatever the operating ambient temperature is, that should be the temperature of the lizard's body also. But there's evidence that these are actually thermoregulating. So when it's very, very cold, body temperature is hotter than expected. When it's warm, body temperature is cooler than expected. So they're doing something to keep body temperatures within some optimal range. And because they're adapted to a narrow band of temperatures, whether they're out foraging, if it's too cool, they're not foraging. If it's too warm, they're not foraging. The proportion of the total individuals in the habitat that are foraging is between that range of temperatures. And the performance, the physiological performance of the organism is also related to that range in temperature. So if you look at how fast these lizards are running, when it's very cool, they're not running very fast. When it's very hot, they can't run very fast, but they need some optimal temperature range to be able to perform. So what's going to happen with climate change in the future? If you look at climate scenarios and you're projecting and saying by the year 2100 or the temperature is going to be 4 degrees Celsius, 5 degrees, whatever, hotter than it is today, the proportion of individuals that are foraging in the future goes from 100% down to about 50%. So they're not out there eating. And they're not performing as well either in terms of their physiology, in terms of their sprint speed, in terms of their ability to run, and so on. So by 2100, it's likely that it's going to be very, very hot for this lizard, the spiny-tailed lizard, in the Thar. From land to sea, this is along the east coast of India on the beaches of Orissa, where almost every year you have lakhs and lakhs of olive ridley turtles coming ashore onto the beach to lay eggs. This is called the Aribada, one of the most spectacular phenomenon in nature. And they're all coming and laying eggs here, and you can see the numbers of individual turtles there. It's absolutely a magnificent spectacle. Although all these global change drivers are operating, there's no real evidence that the numbers of turtles that come every year onto these beaches is declining. There's no real evidence for that. But something more hidden might be at play over here, because turtles have something called temperature sex determination. If they lay their eggs and it's too cool, you get males. If the temperatures are warm, you get females. So in the future, depending on which month in the future, based on different climate scenarios, depending on which month these turtles are laying their eggs and what those temperatures in that month might be in the future, you might end up having almost all females in that turtle population, which is a huge problem because then that might necessitate active intervention to incubate eggs at different temperatures and so on. Sticking with turtles and looking at pollution, microplastics, and I'm sure everybody's heard of microplastics, are present in the eggs, the hatchlings, and the adults of these turtles. They're there, and gravid females pass on microplastics from their bodies into eggs. And most of these microplastics are fiber type microplastics, likely from fishing gear where turtles get ensnared in fishing nets, and then the plastics enter their body. Going back to land, pretty high land. This is from Arunachal Pradesh mid elevations, where we've been working comparing primary forest and log forest, monitoring 3 primary forest plots and 3 log forest plots, and monitoring birds on these plots from 2011 till now. And we, misnet these birds, we put rings on them, and we release them, and then we're able to track these populations. And we're trying to understand what happens to the ecological context of these birds, what happens to the abiotic environment, what happens to the biotic environment of these birds. And what happens is this: if you look at temperatures on average in log forest are about 2 degrees Celsius hotter than temperatures in primary forest. That's just time of day, so midnight to next midnight. And at midday, temperatures are on average 2 degrees Celsius hotter in primary forest. And at the maximum, those temperatures can go up to 6 Celsius hotter in log forest than in primary forest. So not only is climate change causing gradual increases in temperature, habitat degradation is compounding those impacts. Habitat degradation is complicating those effects. And so as a result of increased temperature, humidity also goes down. So log forest is hotter and drier, and that leads to change in arthropod community composition. There are less spiders, less bugs, and less caterpillars in log forest. There are more flies in log forest than in primary forest. And what these birds are eating are the bugs, the spiders, and the caterpillars. So those are declining in log forest. And so that's likely to have implications for the performance, the fitness of these birds. And we do see for many species that survival rates on the y-axis are declining quite drastically with time, where you're going from about 80% survival to 40% survival over a 15-year time period, which is quite a dramatic decline. Moving south onto onto our Chalakere campus, which is 4 hours north of here, which has beautiful scrub, beautiful savanna. And here what's happening is you have savanna that's been undisturbed, and you have savanna where there's grazing by both native and by native herbivores and livestock. And the result of grazing, the composition of the plant communities changes. And how that changes is this: if you look at ungrazed land, and you look at the 10 most abundant plants in that landscape, you have one grass dominating that ungrazed habitat. But if you have grazing, then the dominance of that grass comes down, and it allows other grasses to replace it. So the composition of the community is changing. So what was the second most common species in ungrazed forest, ungrazed savanna, is now the 5th most common species in grazed savanna. And you see these changes in the way in which the composition of the community changes. And you can also ask at a higher scale, when you're talking about grazing ecosystems, and grazing ecosystems are very important for sequestering and storing soil carbon. What happens? What is the impact of grazing on soil carbon? And soil carbon is one of those largest stores of carbon that we have on the planet. So in terms of climate change, it's vitally important to understand carbon dynamics. How is carbon changing over time? And for this, we go to Spiti, high altitude grassland, where you have a range of ungulates that are both wild and native that are grazing there. And if you exclude grazers, if you fence out a part of that grassland, you say, all right, you goats can't go in there anymore and graze, what happens to carbon stocks in the soil as a result of that? And what you see is that in ungrazed pasture, carbon and nitrogen levels don't fluctuate as much, or they're more stable than carbon and nitrogen levels in ungrazed. Sorry, if you go to grazed areas, carbon and nitrogen is much more stable over time than in the ungrazed areas. So some amount of grazing is keeping the soil carbon stable. And so that's important to understand, because we need to know how carbon goes into the atmosphere and how carbon comes back into the soil. And so basically you've got very little fluctuation in soil carbon in the grazed plots, whereas you have a lot of fluctuation in soil carbon in the ungrazed habitats. So this is all empirical work, but we also do theoretical work. And so this is on alternative stable systems in ecosystems. So you very often have situations where you have two alternative stable states in ecosystems. You can have forest and you can have grassland. And what tips that balance and moves forest to grassland and then grassland back to forest is rainfall. So if rainfall increases, you can move from a grassland to a forest. If rainfall decreases, you can go back from being a forest to a grassland. And so you can model this. So here you've got a system where you've got, let's say, rainfall on this axis and forest cover on the y-axis. And where rainfall is low, you have low forest cover. And where rainfall is high, you have high forest cover. But at intermediate rainfall, you could have either forest or you could have grassland. And so at that intermediate level, if you looked at forest cover, you should see both forest cover related to grassland, which is low forest cover, and high forest cover related to actual forests in that. So you have what is called a bimodal distribution in forest cover in this case. And if you look at Northeast India and you look at the distribution of forest covers and stable states, there is no evidence yet for alternative stable states in the forests of Northeast India. But that can change. That can change as a result of the climate becoming drier. That can change as a result of increased forest fire frequency. And we're seeing that happening in the Amazon right now, where the Amazon is likely to tip from being forest to largely becoming savanna. And these are sort of early warning signs that we can monitor to understand where we're headed in these ecosystems. And this has already been done with the long-term monitoring plot in Mudumalai, which started off in the late 1980s. And if you track temperatures over the years and you track rainfall over the years, temperature here and rainfall there, you have a period of drought with very low rainfall and high temperatures. And in that time is when you also see fire coming into that system. And there, when you have that fire coming in, it changes the composition. So that's the change in abundance of plants in the understory, where you've got some plants really declining as a result of fire, other plants increasing their abundances. So spatially, if you look at this from the top, you can actually look at how the distribution of plants has changed as a response to fire. Now, we need to do long-term work to be able to understand this, and one of the multi-institutional partnerships that has been set up under the aegis of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change is the Long-Term Ecological Observatories program, which is the coordination cell of which is housed at the Center for Ecological Sciences. And there are 6 sites representing the diversity of ecosystems and habitats that India is home to, terrestrial and marine, and working on a range of fauna and flora and phenomena such as animal movement to better try and understand where we're headed in terms of ecology in the Anthropocene. Thank you.